The sun hung low over the red rocks of Arizona Territory, painting the parched grasslands in shades of copper and rust. It was the kind of evening that made a man feel small against the vastness of creation, when shadows stretched long and the desert wind carried whispers of ancient spirits. Thomas McKenna pulled his weathered hat lower against the glare, guiding his horse along the narrow trail that wound between towering mesas. The year was 1887, and the frontier was changing. The Apache Wars were supposedly over, but tension still crackled like lightning before a storm between the settlers and the native peoples. Thomas knew better than most how fragile the peace was. His small ranch, nestled in a valley 20 miles from the nearest town, sat precariously between two worlds, the expanding settlements of white ranchers and the traditional lands of the Apache. At 42, Thomas cut a lonely figure against the landscape. His wife Margaret had died of fever 3 winters past, leaving him with nothing but memories and a ranch that barely kept him afloat. The other ranchers looked at him sideways, wondering why he hadn't taken another wife to help with the work. But Thomas couldn't explain the hollow feeling in his chest, the way Margaret's laughter still echoed in the empty rooms of their adobe house. He was checking on his small herd of cattle, scattered across the brittle grass near Skeleton Creek, a name that suited the bone-dry riverbed more with each passing year. The drought had been particularly cruel this season, and Thomas worried about getting the cattle through another scorching summer. The distant crack of rifle fire shattered his contemplation. Thomas pulled up his mount, a sturdy bay mare named Belle, and listened. More shots echoed across the canyon, followed by the thunder of hooves. His hand instinctively moved to the Winchester in his saddle scabbard, though he hoped he wouldn't need it. Through a gap in the rocks, he saw them, 2 Apache women on foot, running with the desperate grace of hunted deer. Their traditional dress was torn, and even from a distance, Thomas could see the exhaustion in their movements. Behind them, 4 cavalry soldiers on horseback were closing in, their blue uniforms dark against the red earth. Thomas's jaw tightened. He'd heard the stories in town about soldiers who went beyond their orders, who saw every Apache as an enemy regardless of whether they were peaceful. These women carried no weapons that he could see, only woven baskets that bounced against their hips as they ran. The younger of the 2 stumbled, and the older one, perhaps a sister or cousin, turned back to help her. That moment of compassion would cost them. The soldiers were nearly upon them now, rifles raised. Thomas faced a choice that would change everything. He could ride away, pretend he'd seen nothing. It would be the safe thing, the smart thing. No one would blame a white rancher for avoiding trouble with the Apache. But as he watched the women's terrified faces, something stirred in him. Perhaps it was Margaret's voice in his memory, reminding him that a man's character was measured by what he did when no one was watching, without fully understanding why. Thomas spurred Belle forward and fired his rifle into the air. The sharp report echoed off the canyon walls like thunder. "Stampede!" he shouted at the top of his lungs, knowing a herd of wild mustangs often watered near here. His gambit worked. The soldiers' horses, already excited by the chase, shied at the sudden noise. One reared, nearly throwing its rider. In the confusion, Thomas fired again and began driving his own cattle toward the soldiers, creating a dust cloud and chaos. "Damn ranchers lost control of his herd," one soldier shouted, fighting to control his mount as longhorns thundered past. The 2 Apache women didn't waste the opportunity. They vanished into a narrow crevice in the rocks that Thomas knew led to a network of caves. The soldiers, cursing and trying to calm their horses while avoiding the cattle, lost sight of their quarry. Thomas played his part, riding after his cattle and shouting apologies. "Sorry, boys, that gunfire spooked 'em good. Let me get 'em rounded up." The sergeant, a hard-faced man with sun-weathered skin, gave Thomas a long, suspicious look. "You see any Apache women come through here? Rancher?" "Apache." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "Haven't seen hide nor hair of any Apache for months. Just me and these ornery cattle out here." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. But with no evidence and the sun setting fast, he had little choice but to move on. "If you do see any hostiles, you report it to Fort Buchanan. Understand? Yes, sir, Thomas replied, tipping his hat, though I doubt any Apache would bother with a broke rancher like me. He watched the soldiers ride off, their figures disappearing into the gathering dusk. Only when they were gone did he allow himself to breathe deeply. His hands were trembling slightly as he gathered his scattered cattle. What had he done? He'd just aided Apache fugitives and lied to the U.S. Army. As he worked, he caught movement from the corner of his eye. The two women had emerged from their hiding place and stood watching him from a safe distance. The older one, who looked to be in her 30s, had the bearing of someone accustomed to hardship but not broken by it. The younger, perhaps early 20s, possessed a delicate beauty that even fear and exhaustion couldn't diminish. For a moment that seemed to stretch like pulled taffy. They simply looked at each other across the divide of two worlds. Thomas saw gratitude in their dark eyes, mixed with wariness, the look of people who had learned not to trust easily. He touched the brim of his hat in a gentle salute, then turned Bell back toward his cattle. He didn't look back, but he felt their eyes on him as he rode away. The desert was darkening now, the first stars appearing like scattered diamonds. Coyotes began their evening song, and somewhere an owl called out a warning. Thomas McKenna, lonely rancher and widower, had no idea that this single act of compassion would seal his fate. He thought he would never see those women again, that this strange encounter would fade into memory like so many other moments in a hard life. But the desert had other plans. The old Apache spirits that dwelled in the red rocks and whispered in the wind had witnessed his choice. And in the complex web of honor, debt, and destiny that governed both Apache and frontier life, some threads, once pulled, could never be untangled. As he drove his cattle home under a canopy of stars, Thomas couldn't shake the image of those two women, their grace under pressure, their fierce determination to survive, and most of all, that fleeting moment when their eyes had met his with something more than mere gratitude. It was recognition, perhaps, of one human soul acknowledging another across an impossible divide. The wind picked up, sending dust devils dancing across his path. Change was coming to Thomas McKenna's life like a storm across the desert, sudden, powerful, and transformative. He just didn't know it yet. The news traveled faster than a prairie fire in drought season. By the time Thomas rode into Cedar Falls the following week for supplies, the whole town was buzzing with talk. He first sensed trouble when Jake Morrison, who ran the general store, barely looked him in the eye while measuring out flour. "Heard there was some commotion out by Skeleton Creek," Jake said, his voice carefully neutral as he tied up the flour sack. "Soldiers chasing some Apache." Thomas kept his expression steady as he loaded the supplies into his wagon. "That's so? Must have missed it." "Funny thing," Jake continued, wiping his hands on his apron. "Sergeant Hollis says some rancher's cattle got in the way. Spooked his horses real good, allowed them Apache to slip away." The store had gone quiet. Thomas could feel the eyes of other customers on him, ranch hands, townswomen, even the pastor's wife, Mrs. Whitmore, who clutched her shopping basket like a shield. "Cattle can be unpredictable," Thomas said evenly, "especially when guns start firing." Jake's face hardened. "Man's gotta know which side he's on. McKenna, this ain't no time for Apache sympathizers." Thomas paid for his goods without another word and left the store. But the damage was done. In a frontier town where loyalty was everything and suspicion could be deadly, he'd been marked. Over the next days, the cold shoulders multiplied. At Sunday service, the pews around him remained empty, as if he carried some contagion. Reverend Whitmore's sermon about wolves among the sheep felt particularly pointed. When Thomas tried to hire extra hands for the fall roundup, men who'd worked for him before suddenly had other commitments. Even worse were the threats. He found a note nailed to his gate. "Apache lovers ain't welcome here." One morning, he discovered two of his best cattle shot dead in the pasture, flies already gathering on their carcasses. Thomas buried his anger deep and went about his work. The ranch was suffering. He couldn't manage everything alone, and with no help coming, he'd have to sell off more cattle than planned just to make it through winter. But what gnawed at him wasn't the financial loss, it was the injustice of it all. He'd saved 2 women from certain death, and for that, he was being treated like a traitor. The worst part was the isolation. He'd grown used to loneliness after Margaret died. But this was different. This was the active shunning of a community he'd been part of for 15 years. He found himself talking to Belle more than ever, just to hear a voice in the empty vastness of his days. 3 weeks after the incident at Skeleton Creek, everything changed again. It was a moonless night, and Thomas had just finished checking on a sick calf when he heard the soft nicker of horses outside. He grabbed his rifle and stepped onto the porch, expecting trouble. Perhaps some of the rougher elements from town had decided to escalate their campaign against him. Instead, he found himself staring at 2 Apache women on painted ponies. It took him a moment to recognize them in the darkness. They wore different clothes now. Traditional doeskin dresses decorated with intricate beadwork. The older sister sat tall and proud, her face unreadable as carved stone. The younger one watched him with those same dark eyes he remembered, though now they held something harder, more determined. "Thomas McKenna," the older sister said in accented but clear English. "You come with us." It wasn't a request. Thomas noticed the Spencer carbine across her lap, the way her hand rested on it with casual familiarity. Behind them, he could make out the shapes of 2 Apache warriors in the shadows, silent as ghosts. "And if I refuse?" Thomas asked, though he kept his rifle pointed at the ground. "2 Apache sisters took a rancher to council," she said, as if that explained everything. "You saved us. Now council must decide what kind of man saves Apache women. Come willingly, or we take you anyway." Thomas thought of his ranch, his cattle, the life he'd built here despite all the hardships. Then he thought of the cold faces in town, the dead cattle, the note on his gate. What was left for him here now? "Let me saddle my horse," he said. The journey was hard and disorienting. They rode through the night, following trails Thomas didn't know existed. The Apache moved like shadows, confident in the darkness, while Thomas struggled to keep up. They climbed into the mountains, the air growing thin and cold. By dawn, his legs ached and his back screamed, but he didn't complain. They stopped only briefly to water the horses at hidden springs. The younger sister offered him pemmican and water from a gourd. When their fingers brushed during the exchange, she pulled back quickly, but not before he caught something in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper. "What's your name?" he asked her quietly, while the others were busy with the horses. She glanced at her sister before answering, "I am called Ayana. My sister is Kosheda." "What does the council want with me?" Ayana's English was less fluent than her sister's, but her meaning was clear. "Some say you helped us only by accident. Others say you are different from other white men. Council must see your heart. And then," she looked away, "then they decide if you live or die." The blunt honesty of it should have terrified him, but Thomas found himself oddly calm. He'd made his choice at Skeleton Creek, and he'd stand by it, whatever came. They rode for 2 more days, the landscape growing wilder and more beautiful with each mile. Towering pines replaced the desert scrub, and streams ran clear and cold from mountain springs. Thomas had lived in Arizona territory for 15 years, but this was country he'd never seen, sacred land hidden from white eyes. On the 3rd night, exhausted and sore, they finally crested a ridge and looked down into a hidden valley. Smoke rose from dozens of wickiups arranged in careful patterns. Dogs barked and children ran between the dwellings. It was a whole Apache community, alive and thriving despite all the government's efforts to force them onto reservations. As they rode down into the camp, Thomas felt the weight of many eyes upon him. Warriors stood with hands on weapons. Women pulled children close. Elders watched with faces that had seen too much tragedy. He was the enemy here, the face of every soldier who had burned their homes, every settler who had taken their land. Kosheda led him to the center of camp, where a large fire pit waited. She gestured for him to dismount. "You wait here," she commanded. "Touch nothing. Speak to no one. When sun sets, council begins." Thomas stood by his horse, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his empty ranch house. Around him, the camp went about its business, but always with one eye on the white stranger in their midst. He could feel their anger, their suspicion, their grief. How many of them had lost family to soldiers' bullets or settlers' diseases? As the sun began to sink toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, drums began to beat. The sound seemed to come from the earth itself, deep and primal. Thomas McKenna, rancher and widower, stood at the edge of two worlds, waiting to discover which one would claim him. The council fire blazed high as darkness fell, casting dancing shadows across the faces of the Apache gathered in a great circle. Thomas stood in the center, feeling the weight of judgment from every direction. The drums had stopped, replaced by a silence so complete he could hear the crackling of burning pine logs and his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The elders sat in the place of honor, their weathered faces telling stories of survival against impossible odds. Warriors flanked them, some bearing scars from battles with soldiers, others young enough that the fight for freedom was all they'd ever known. Women and children filled the outer rings, their eyes reflecting the firelight like stars fallen to earth. An ancient man rose slowly, leaning on a staff decorated with eagle feathers. His voice, when it came, was like wind through dry leaves. "I am Nightshade," he said in English. "For Thomas's benefit, I speak for the council. You are Thomas McKenna, the rancher who interfered with soldiers hunting our women." It wasn't a question, but Thomas nodded. "I am. Tell us why." The simple question hung in the air. Thomas looked around the circle, seeing suspicion, hatred, curiosity, and pain in equal measure. He thought of giving some noble speech about justice and humanity, but these people had heard too many white men's lies to believe in pretty words. "I saw two women running for their lives," he said simply. "Soldiers with guns chasing them. It didn't seem right." "Many things are not right," a younger warrior interjected harshly. "White men taking our land is not right. Killing our buffalo is not right. Yet you did nothing about these things." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Thomas felt sweat beating on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "No," he admitted. "I didn't. Maybe I should have." Cocheta stood and walked into the circle. In the firelight, she looked fierce and beautiful, every inch the warrior woman. "I will tell what happened," she announced. She spoke in Apache first, her voice rising and falling with the natural rhythm of the language. Thomas couldn't understand the words, but he could read the gestures, see the way people leaned forward to listen. Then she switched to English, for his benefit, and perhaps to ensure nothing was lost in translation. "My sister and I were gathering medicine plants near the sacred springs. We were on the land of our grandmothers, where Apache have walked since before memory. The soldiers came upon us suddenly. We ran. They followed. They would have caught us." She paused, her dark eyes finding Thomas in the firelight. "This man saw us. He could have ridden away. The soldiers would have rewarded him for his silence, or at least left him in peace. Instead, he fired his gun and drove his cattle between us and the soldiers. He lied to them. He risked everything for two Apache women he had never seen before. Perhaps he hoped for reward," suggested another warrior, his face marked by a scar that ran from temple to jaw. "Perhaps he thought to gain something from us." Ayana rose then, moving with the fluid grace of a deer. Her voice was softer than her sister's, but carried its own strength. "I watched his face when he made the choice. I saw no calculation, no greed. I saw—" She struggled for the English word. "I saw recognition. One person seeing another person in need." An elderly woman spoke up from the crowd, her voice cracked but forceful. "Words are wind. Many white men have spoken kindly while their hands reached for our lands. How do we know this one is different?" The debate raged on. Some spoke of other white men who had shown kindness, traders who dealt fairly, missionaries who learned their language, even soldiers who had refused to follow brutal orders. Others recounted betrayals, treaties broken, promises that turned to ash. Thomas stood silent through it all. understanding that his fate hung not just on his own actions but on the weight of history between their peoples. A young boy, perhaps 10 years old, suddenly broke from his mother's arms and ran into the circle. He pointed at Thomas with a trembling finger. "White soldiers killed my father last spring," he said in accented English. "Shot him when he was hunting. He had no weapon, only a deer." His voice broke. "Why should this white man live when my father is dead?" The raw pain in the child's voice cut through Thomas like a blade. He dropped to one knee, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm sorry for your father. It wasn't right. Your sorrow brings him back?" The boy spat. "No," Thomas admitted. "Nothing can do that. But maybe," he struggled to find the right words, "maybe if more people try to do what's right, fewer boys will lose their fathers." The boy's mother came forward, pulling her son back with gentle hands. She studied Thomas for a long moment, then spoke in rapid Apache to the council. Naichi translated. "She says grief makes us blind. She says judging this man for all white men's crimes is like the soldiers who hunt all Apache for one warrior's raids. She has spoken." The debate continued as the fire burned lower. Thomas's legs ached from standing, but he didn't dare move. He watched the faces around him, seeing individuals now rather than a mass of hostility. The old woman who kept pulling her blanket tighter against the cold, the young couple holding hands in the shadows, the warrior who absently rubbed an old wound as he listened. Finally, Naichi called for silence. The old chief stood again, his ancient eyes finding Thomas in the dying firelight. "The council is divided," he announced. "Some say you acted with good heart. Others say one good act cannot wash away the blood between our peoples. Some remember whites who seemed friendly before betraying us. Others say we must judge each person by their own actions, not by their skin." He paused, and Thomas felt the night holding its breath. "There is one more thing," Naichi continued. "Sela, our medicine woman, has dreamed of you." A very old woman was helped to her feet by two younger women. Her hair was white as snow, her face so deeply lined it seemed carved from the ancient rock of the mountains. When she spoke, her voice carried a power that made the fire flare higher. "I saw a white man standing between two paths," she said in surprisingly clear English. "One path led back to his own people, to safety and comfort and slow death of the spirit. The other path led into darkness and danger. But at its end was a light that could heal both Apache and white. The choice was his to make." She fixed her clouded eyes on Thomas, and he felt she was looking straight through him. "You have already chosen, Thomas McKenna. You chose at the creek. You chose when you came with our warriors. Now we must choose whether to let you walk the path you have begun." The council murmured. Considering this new element, visions and dreams carried weight among the Apache, but they were also open to interpretation. "We will vote," Naichi declared. "Those who say this man should die for the crimes of his people, stand to the north. Those who say he should live and be sent away, stand to the south. Those who believe he should be given a chance to prove himself, stand to the east." The crowd began to move. Thomas watched, his heart pounding. As people sorted themselves, the north side grew steadily, mostly warriors, but some women and elders too. The south filled with those who wanted him gone but not dead. The east side remained smaller but significant. Kosheda and Ayana stood there, along with the mother of the boy who had confronted him, some of the younger people, and, surprisingly, the ancient medicine woman. When the movement stopped, Naichi counted each group carefully. The night stretched on, silent but for the pop of the fire and the distant cry of an owl. Finally, the old chief spoke. "The council has decided, by the narrowest of margins, you will live, but you will not simply be sent away. You must prove yourself worthy of the trust Kosheda and Ayana have placed in you. You must show us whether you are truly different, or merely another white man with honeyed words." Relief flooded through Thomas, followed quickly by apprehension. He was alive, but what trials lay ahead? "What must I do?" he asked. Naichi's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. That will be decided tomorrow. Tonight, you are our guest. Kosheta and Ayana will guard you, since they spoke for you. Think well on what path you truly wish to walk. Thomas McKenna, the easy choice is behind you now. The temporary shelter they gave Thomas was a small wickiup on the edge of camp, close enough to be watched but far enough to mark his outsider status. Kosheta and Ayana took turns standing guard, their presence both protection and prison. As the camp settled into sleep, Thomas sat on the hard ground, his mind racing with everything that had happened. Near midnight, both sisters entered the wickiup together. Kosheta carried a water gourd and some dried meat, while Ayana brought a buffalo robe against the mountain cold. They sat across from him, the small space suddenly feeling crowded with unspoken questions. "You must be wondering why we defended you," Kosheta said, her voice low to avoid waking others. Thomas accepted the water gratefully. "The thought had crossed my mind. You don't owe me anything for what I did. That is where you are wrong." Kosheta replied, "Among Apache, a life debt is sacred, but it is more than that." She paused, seeming to weigh her words. "Tell me, white man, why did you really help us? The truth now, not what you told the council." Thomas was quiet for a moment, listening to the night sounds outside, wind in the pines, a distant coyote, the soft breathing of the camp. "My wife died 3 years ago. Fever took her in just 2 days. I couldn't save her. When I saw you running, saw those soldiers, I think I just couldn't watch anyone else die if I could help it." Ayana leaned forward, studying his face in the dim light filtering through the wickiup entrance. "You loved her very much." "Your wife? Margaret was everything." Thomas admitted, "When she died, it was like the color drained out of the world. I kept the ranch going because I didn't know what else to do, but it was just empty motions." "I understand this feeling," Ayana said softly. Her sister shot her a warning look, but she continued. "My husband was killed in a raid 2 summers ago. The emptiness, it is like a hunger that no food can fill." Kosheta's expression softened. "Ayana, we should not—" "No, sister. If we ask him to speak truth, we must also—" Ayana met Thomas's eyes. "That day at the creek, when you saved us, it was the first time since my husband died that I saw someone choose compassion over safety. It reminded me that not all hearts are closed to kindness." The confession hung in the air between them. Thomas felt something shift, a wall crumbling that he hadn't even known was there. These weren't savage enemies, as the town would have him believe. They were people who had loved and lost, just as he had. "What happened to your husband?" he asked gently. "Soldiers came to our camp looking for raiders who had stolen horses." Ayana replied, "My husband, Kuruk, was hunting far from camp. He knew nothing of the raid. When he returned, the soldiers shot first. He died carrying the deer that would have fed our family." "Like the boy's father at the council," Thomas said, understanding dawning. "Yes, too many stories like this among our people," Kosheta said bitterly. "This is why many wanted you dead. You have the face of our sorrow." "But you didn't vote that way." Kosheta was quiet for a long moment. "Our father was different from many Apache warriors. He traveled far when he was young, lived among Mexicans, even spent time in white settlements. He taught us that hate is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die. He said we must see each person as they are, not as we fear them to be. He sounds wise. Soldiers killed him 5 winters ago." Kosheta's voice was steady, but Thomas could hear the pain beneath. "He was trying to negotiate peace. They said he was reaching for a weapon. He was holding a peace pipe." The 3 sat in silence, each lost in their own griefs. Outside, wind rattled the wickiup's framework, bringing the scent of pine and the promise of rain. "I need to know," Thomas finally said. "What happens tomorrow? What test will the council give me?" The sisters exchanged glances. "We do not know," Kosheta admitted. "But it will be difficult. Some on the council hope you will fail or flee. Then they can say they were right about white men." "I won't run," Thomas said firmly. "No," Ayana agreed, a small smile touching her lips. "I do not think you will." As the night wore on, they talked more freely. The sisters told him about their people's struggles, the constant pressure to move to the reservation, the loss of their traditional hunting grounds. Thomas shared stories of his own hardships, the drought that nearly broke him, the loneliness of the frontier, the way the town had turned against him. "You are alone in the world," Ayanna observed. "No family, no children. Margaret and I, we tried. It wasn't meant to be. After she died, her family back east wanted nothing to do with me. My own folks passed years ago. The ranch is all I have." He paused. "Or had. I doubt there'll be much left when I go back." "If I go back? You would give up your land?" Kosheta sounded surprised. "White men die for land. Kill for it. It's just dirt and grass." Thomas said, "What's the point of holding on to it if there's no one to share it with? If the whole community wants me gone?" A gust of wind suddenly struck the wickiup with unusual force, and the entrance flap flew open. Sand and debris swirled in, stinging their eyes. Ayanna jumped up to secure the flap, but the wind knocked her off balance. Without thinking, Thomas lunged forward, catching her before she could fall against the sharp poles of the framework. For a moment, they were pressed close in the small space, his arms around her waist, her hands gripping his shoulders for balance. He could feel her heartbeat, quick as a bird's, could smell the sage smoke in her hair. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. "Ayanna!" Kosheta's sharp voice broke the spell. Thomas released her quickly, stepping back. Ayanna's face was flushed as she turned to secure the entrance flap properly. When she returned to her seat, she carefully avoided his gaze. "The storm is coming," Kosheta said, though whether she meant the weather or something else wasn't clear. "We should rest. Tomorrow will test you in ways you cannot imagine." She rose to leave, clearly expecting her sister to follow. Ayanna hesitated. "Thank you," she said quietly to Thomas, "for catching me." "It was nothing," he replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. After they left, Thomas lay on the buffalo robe, listening to the storm build outside. The wickiup shook with each gust, and soon rain began to fall, drumming on the hide covering. He thought about Ayanna's eyes in that brief moment of closeness, the warmth of her in his arms. It had been so long since he'd felt anything beyond grief and duty. But what was he thinking? He was a white man in an Apache camp, here on sufferance, his life hanging by a thread. Whatever he'd felt in that moment, whatever she might have felt, it was impossible. Two different worlds, with too much blood between them. The storm intensified, and water began to seep through weak spots in the wickiup. Thomas tried to shift away from the leaks, but soon there was nowhere dry to go. He huddled under the buffalo robe, cold and miserable, when he heard movement outside. Ayanna slipped back in, carrying another hide covering. Without speaking, she began patching the worst leaks, her movements quick and efficient. When she finished, she turned to go, but Thomas caught her hand. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. She looked down at their joined hands but didn't pull away. "Because you helped us without asking why, because you see us as people, not as enemies." She paused. "Because my heart tells me you are meant to be here, though I do not understand how or why." "Ayanna." "Sleep now," she said, gently extracting her hand. "Tomorrow the council will test your body and spirit. You will need strength." She disappeared into the storm, leaving Thomas alone with his tumultuous thoughts. The rain continued through the night, washing the world clean, preparing it for whatever dawn would bring. In the darkness of the wickiup, Thomas McKenna faced a truth he hadn't expected. Somewhere between saving 2 Apache women and sitting in this storm-battered shelter, he'd begun to feel alive again for the first time in 3 years. Dawn came cold and clear after the storm. The mountains washed in pale light and the air sharp with the scent of wet pine. Thomas emerged from the wickiup stiff and tired, to find a group of warriors waiting for him. Among them was the scarred warrior who had spoken against him at the council. "I am Tarak," the man said without preamble. "The council has decided your test. You will hunt with us. If you prove yourself useful and trustworthy, you may earn a place here. If you fail or betray us." He let the threat hang unspoken. Thomas nodded. He'd expected something like this. "What are we hunting?" "Whatever the mountain provides. Deer, elk, perhaps bear if we find sign." "You claim to be a rancher. Can you track? Can you shoot?" "I can hold my own." Tarek's expression suggested doubt. "We shall see. Get your rifle." They set out as the sun climbed higher, 6 Apache warriors and 1 white man, moving through the forest in a line. Thomas quickly realized how much he had to learn. The Apache moved like smoke through the trees, their footfalls silent on the pine needles. He felt clumsy by comparison, every snapped twig earning him contemptuous glances. Cocheta and Ayana watched from the edge of camp as the hunting party departed. Thomas caught Ayana's eye briefly, saw concern there that warmed him despite the cold morning. The first hours were humbling. The Apache found signs Thomas would have missed entirely. A broken branch here, a faint track there. They communicated with hand signals he didn't understand, leaving him always a step behind. When they stopped at a stream to drink, Tarek made his disdain clear. "You move like a wounded buffalo," he said. "Every animal for miles knows we're here because of you." "Then teach me," Thomas replied, swallowing his pride. "I'm here to learn." One of the younger warriors, a man named Nayeli, surprised Thomas by demonstrating how to walk heel to toe, rolling his foot to minimize noise. "Watch the ground 3 steps ahead," he advised. "Not at your feet. Trust your body to remember." They found elk sign near midday, fresh droppings and tracks leading up a steep ridge. The hunters spread out, moving to surround their prey. Thomas was placed on the flank, downstream of where they expected the elk to flee. The weight stretched his nerves taut. Every sound might be their quarry, or might be nothing. His position gave him a clear view of a small meadow where a stream pooled before tumbling down the mountain. If the elk came this way... A crash of brush upslope sent his heart racing. The elk burst into view, a massive bull followed by 3 cows. Running hard, Thomas raised his rifle, tracking the bull, waiting for a clear shot. The animal was magnificent, its rack spreading like tree branches, its coat dark with sweat. He squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the meadow, and the bull stumbled but didn't fall. Before Thomas could work the lever for a second shot, arrows sprouted from its flanks. The great animal took 3 more strides before collapsing. The other Apache emerged from cover, but their celebration was short-lived. A roar that turned Thomas's blood to ice erupted from the timber above them. A grizzly bear, drawn by the commotion, or perhaps stalking the elk itself, charged down the slope with terrifying speed. "Scatter!" Tarek shouted in English for Thomas's benefit. The warriors dove for cover, but the bear focused on the fallen elk and on Thomas, who stood between the predator and its desired meal. The grizzly was huge, its silver-tipped fur rippling over massive muscles, its eyes small and furious. Thomas fired, levering and firing again as fast as he could. The bullet struck home but seemed only to enrage the bear further. It rose on its hind legs, towering above him, bellowing its fury. His rifle clicked empty. "This is how I die," he thought with strange calm. An arrow whistled past his ear, burying itself in the bear's throat. Then another, and another. The Apache warriors had regrouped, firing arrows with deadly precision. But the bear was still coming, still focused on Thomas with single-minded rage. That's when he saw Cocheta in the bear's path, her bowstring drawn but her shot blocked by Thomas himself. Without thinking, he threw himself sideways, rolling clear. Cocheta's arrow flew true, striking the bear's eye. The massive animal crashed down mere feet from where Thomas lay, its death throes shaking the ground. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Nayeli let out a whoop of triumph that was taken up by the others. Even Tarek looked impressed. "You drew its charge," he said to Thomas. "Gave us clear shots. That took courage. Or stupidity?" Thomas gasped, his heart still pounding. "Sometimes they are the same." Tarek actually smiled. "Help us dress the elk. We'll need to work fast before the smell draws more bears." As they worked, Thomas noticed the Apache's attitude toward him shifting. He'd proven he could face danger without running. When they divided the meat to carry back, they gave him a fair share of the load without complaint. The journey back to camp was different. The warriors included him in their quiet jokes, showed him how to tie the meat properly for carrying, even shared their water when his ran low. As they neared the camp, Naili fell into step beside him. "Kosheta took a great risk, firing so close to you," he observed. "If you had not moved, she'd have hit me instead of the bear," Thomas finished. "Yes, yet she drew her bow anyway. And you moved to give her the shot, though it put you in greater danger. The council will hear of this." When they arrived at camp, people gathered to see the successful hunt. Children ran alongside, marveling at the size of the elk. The bear encounter had already become a story, growing with each telling. Thomas found himself at the center of attention he neither wanted nor knew how to handle. Ayana appeared at his elbow as he helped hang the meat for distribution. "I heard you fought a bear," she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. "The bear fought me," Thomas corrected. "I mostly just tried not to die." "Kosheta says you moved so she could save your life, that you protected her by drawing the bear's attack." "Anyone would have." "No," Ayana interrupted. "Not anyone. You think like Apache now, like the group matters more than the one." She touched his arm briefly. "But please, no more bears. My heart cannot take such stories." That evening, the camp feasted on fresh elk. Thomas was given a place of honor near the fire, though he still felt like an imposter among these people. Tarak recounted the hunt, his scarred face animated as he described the bear attack. When he reached the part where Thomas had rolled aside for Kosheta's shot, murmurs of approval ran through the crowd. Naichi, the old chief, raised his hand for silence. "One hunt does not make a warrior," he said carefully, "but it shows the beginning of understanding. Thomas McKenna, you have taken the first step on a difficult path. Are you willing to continue?" Thomas looked around the fire, at Tarak, who nodded slightly, at Kosheta, whose stern face showed approval, at Ayana, whose eyes held something deeper than gratitude. "I'm willing," he said. "Then you will stay among us for 1 moon. Naichi declared, "Learn our ways, hunt with our hunters, share our struggles. At the moon's end, if you still wish to be one of us, and if we believe you are sincere, then we will discuss what comes next." The crowd dispersed slowly, people returning to their wiki-ups. Thomas sat by the dying fire, exhausted but oddly content. In 1 day, he'd gone from prisoner to provisional member of the band. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time since Margaret's death, he felt like he was moving towards something rather than just enduring. Ayana brought him tea made from pine needles and wild herbs. She sat beside him as he drank, comfortable with the silence between them. "Your wife," she said eventually. "Would she understand why you're here?" Thomas considered the question. "Margaret always said I was too stubborn for my own good, but she also said the measure of a man was what he did when nobody was watching." He smiled at the memory. "I think she'd understand. Maybe she'd even approve." She was wise. "You're Margaret." "She was." Thomas turned to look at Ayana. "Your husband, tell me about him." As the fire burned to embers and the camp settled into sleep, they talked quietly about love and loss, about the people who had shaped them and left too soon. In sharing their grief, they found an unexpected comfort, a recognition that transcended the divide between their worlds. The morning brought troubling news. A young scout named Kiva rode into camp just after dawn, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. He spoke urgently to Naichi and the other elders, gesturing toward the southern passes. Word spread quickly through the camp like wildfire. Cavalry soldiers were moving through the valleys below, a full company with supply wagons. Thomas was helping repair a wiki-up damaged in the storm when Kosheta found him. Her face was grim. "The council meets. You must come." In the central lodge, the atmosphere was tense. Warriors argued hotly about whether to flee deeper into the mountains or prepare defenses. Some suspected the soldiers were searching specifically for their band, while others believed it might be a routine patrol. They seek the Apache who've been raiding the mining camps near Silver Creek. Tarek argued. That is not us. If we stay quiet, they will pass. And if they find our trail, challenged another warrior named Bidzil. If they follow it here, our children, our elders, we cannot fight a full company. Naichi raised his hand for silence, then turned to Thomas. You know the soldiers' ways. What would you counsel? Thomas felt the weight of every eye upon him. These people had begun to trust him, and now that trust would be tested. How many soldiers exactly? What regiment? Perhaps 60 men. Kiva reported. They fly the flag of Fort Buchanan. The one who leads them rides a black horse with white feet. Thomas's heart sank. Captain Garrett, he's thorough. And he has no love for Apache. If he's searching, he won't give up easily. You know this man? Kosheta asked sharply. By reputation. He lost his brother in a raid 2 years ago. Since then. Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. He sees all Apache as enemies. Murmurs of anger and fear rippled through the lodge. Naichi's weathered face grew more grave. Then we must move the camp. Wait, Thomas said, an idea forming. Moving the whole camp will leave a trail even Garrett can't miss. What if I go down and misdirect them? The lodge erupted in skeptical voices. Bidzil sneered. The white man shows his true heart. He wishes to return to his people, to lead them to us. No, Thomas insisted. Listen, I know the land around here well enough now. I could intercept them, claim I'm out searching for stolen cattle. Tell them I saw a Apache sign heading west toward the desert. Away from here. Garrett might believe a white rancher. And if he doesn't, Tarek asked, if he suspects you, then I'll deal with that when it happens. Kosheta stood. This is foolishness. You would risk yourself for us? Thomas met her gaze steadily. You risked yourself firing that arrow past me yesterday. Seems only fair to return the favor. The debate continued, but eventually Naichi made the decision. Thomas would ride out with 2 Apache scouts who would stay hidden, watching. If he betrayed them, they would ensure he didn't live to guide the soldiers back. As Thomas prepared to leave, saddling Bell with hands that trembled slightly, Ayana appeared with a small leather pouch. For protection, she said quietly, tying it to his saddle. And for luck. Ayana, if something happens, nothing will happen, she interrupted fiercely. You will misdirect the soldiers and return. You must return. The intensity in her voice made him pause. They stood close in the morning shadows, and he could see the fear she was trying to hide. Without thinking, he reached out and touched her cheek gently. I'll come back, he promised. She caught his hand, holding it against her face for just a moment before stepping away. See that you do. Thomas rode out with the 2 scouts, his mind churning with plans and contingencies. They traveled fast through hidden trails until they could see the dust cloud of the approaching column. The scouts melted into the rocks while Thomas continued on, arranging his appearance to look like a rancher who'd been searching rough country, which wasn't far from the truth. He intercepted the column at a creek crossing, riding in openly with his hands visible. Soldiers immediately trained rifles on him until Captain Garrett himself rode forward. The captain was younger than Thomas had expected, perhaps 35, with cold blue eyes and a mouth set in a permanent line of disapproval. State your business. Garrett commanded. Thomas McKenna, Captain, I ranch about 15 miles northeast of here. Been out 2 days looking for stolen cattle. Garrett's eyes narrowed. McKenna, I've heard that name. You're the one who interfered with my men pursuing hostiles near Skeleton Creek. Thomas's heart pounded, but he kept his expression neutral. Your men were chasing shadows. Captain, their gunfire spooked my herd. Cost me 2 days rounding them up. Is that so? Garrett leaned forward in his saddle. And what brings you to this particular valley, Mr. McKenna? Like I said, searching for my cattle. Found tracks heading west, toward the desert flats. Looked like they were being driven by riders. Thomas paused, as if considering. Could be those Apache you're hunting. Heard in town there'd been raids on the mining camps. Apache sign, you say. Fresh. Day. Maybe 2 days old. Heading west fast, like they knew someone was coming. Garrett studied him for a long moment. Thomas could feel sweat running down his back despite the cool morning air. Finally, the captain turned to his lieutenant. Bradley, take a squad and scout west. See if you can find these tracks, mister. McKenna mentions, Sir, what about the reports of Apache in these mountains? Could be false information, Garrett mused, his eyes never leaving Thomas. Or perhaps they've already fled. We'll make camp here, rest the horses. If Bradley finds sign, we pursue west. If not, he smiled coldly. We'll continue our mountain search. Thomas's relief was short-lived. Garrett wasn't dismissing him. You'll stay with us. Mr. McKenna, if these tracks prove true, we might need your expertise. If they prove false, well, we'll have questions. There was no refusing. Thomas made camp with the soldiers, every nerve on edge. He shared their food, listened to their complaints about Apache savages, and tried not to think about what would happen if they discovered his deception. Lieutenant Bradley returned near sunset, frustrated and dusty. No sign of tracks heading west. Sir, scouted 5 miles out. Garrett's expression darkened. He walked over to where Thomas sat by the fire. Seems you were mistaken about those tracks. McKenna, desert wind can cover sign quickly, Thomas offered, but he could see the suspicion crystallizing in the captain's eyes. Or perhaps you're trying to lead us away from something. Sergeant, post a guard on Mr. McKenna. He'll remain our guest until we complete our mission. That night, Thomas lay awake under guard, his mind racing. The Apache scouts would have reported back by now. Would the band flee? Would they think he'd betrayed them? And how could he escape to warn them if Garrett decided to search the mountains thoroughly? Near dawn, his chance came in unexpected form. A rattlesnake, disturbed by the movement of horses, slithered into the camp. The resulting chaos, shouting men, rearing horses, wild gunfire, gave Thomas the distraction he needed. In the confusion, he rolled under a wagon, then belly-crawled to where the horses were picketed. Belle recognized him, staying calm as he cut her loose. He was in the saddle and racing away before the soldiers realized what had happened. Shots rang out behind him, bullets whining past like angry hornets. But Belle was fast and sure-footed, and Thomas knew the terrain better now. He led them on a winding chase through narrow canyons and across rocky ridges where their horses struggled. Still, Garrett's men were persistent. As the sun climbed higher, Thomas could hear them gaining. His heart sank as he realized he was leading them straight toward the Apache camp. He had to turn them away. Had to. An arrow sprouted from the chest of the lead soldier. Then another, and another. Apache warriors materialized from the rocks like ghosts, firing with deadly accuracy. The soldiers wheeled in confusion, trying to return fire at enemies they couldn't see. Thomas saw Tarak among the warriors, his scarred face fierce with battle joy. "Pull back," Garrett shouted. "Retreat to defensible ground," as quickly as it had begun. The ambush ended, the Apache melted away, leaving the soldiers to tend their wounded and dead. Thomas found himself alone on a ridge, watching the cavalry's disorganized retreat. His escape and the ambush had cost them 5 men. Garrett wouldn't forget this. When he finally made it back to the Apache camp, he found them already preparing to move. The encounter had bought them time, but also confirmed the soldiers were too close. Ayanna ran to him as he dismounted, checking him for wounds with hands that shook. "I'm sorry," Thomas said to Nietzsche and the gathered council. "I failed. Garrett suspected me from the start. You warned us." The old chief replied, "Your escape told us the soldiers were coming. We were ready. But now they know for certain we're here. They'll be back with more men." "Yes," Nietzsche agreed sadly. "We must leave this place, find sanctuary deeper in the mountains. And you, Thomas McKenna, must decide. You can no longer walk between worlds. Either you come with us completely, or you leave now and never return. The soldiers saw you escape. They will believe you are with us regardless of what you choose." Thomas looked around at the faces he'd come to know. Tarek's grudging respect, Kosheta's fierce protectiveness, Ayana's eyes bright with unshed tears. Then he thought of his ranch, probably already seized or burned. His old life was truly gone now. "I'll help you move," he said simply. "All of you, to safety. After that, we'll see what path opens before us." As the camp dissolved around him, wiki-ups coming down and belongings being packed, Thomas realized he'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The cavalry would hunt him now as surely as they hunted the Apache. But watching Ayana work alongside her people, seeing the children being lifted onto horses, the elders helped with gentle hands, he found he had no regrets. The die was cast. His fate was now bound to theirs, for better or worse. The new camp lay hidden in a box canyon deep in the Chiricahua Mountains, where ancient pines grew thick and a spring bubbled fresh from the rocks. It had taken them 4 days of hard travel to reach it, moving mainly at night, covering their tracks with the skill of a people who had learned concealment as survival. On the 5th night after their arrival, Naichi called for a formal council. The entire band gathered around the ceremonial fire. Warriors, women, children, elders, all sitting in the traditional circle. Thomas sat where he had been directed, between Kosheta and Tarek, feeling the weight of what was coming. The old chief stood slowly, his voice carrying across the gathering. "We have come to a time of choosing. Thomas McKenna has walked among us for 1 moon. He has hunted with our hunters, shared our dangers, proven his courage. The soldiers now hunt him as they hunt us. The question before the council is this: does he remain a guest, or does he become one of us?" Sela, the ancient medicine woman, spoke first. "I have watched this man. The spirits do not flee from him as they do from most whites. He learns our ways not to possess them, but to understand them. This is rare." Bidzul, still skeptical, countered. "He brought soldiers close to us. His escape led them to attack. Apache blood was spilled because of him. Apache blood was saved because of him." Tarek interjected, surprising everyone. The scarred warrior rarely spoke in council. He risked his life to warn us, when he could have bought his freedom by betraying our location. He chose silence. I was wrong about him. One by one, members of the band spoke. Some praised Thomas's dedication to learning their language and customs. Others worried about the danger of accepting a white man when tensions were so high. Children whispered about the funny way he tried to dance at the harvest celebration. Women mentioned how he helped with heavy work without being asked. Then Kosheta stood, her presence commanding attention. "My sister and I brought this man here. We have watched him closely. He is not perfect. He still walks too loudly and his Apache words sound like a child's, but his heart is good. He sees us as people, not as enemies or curiosities." She paused, looking directly at Thomas. "I say he should be given the choice to become one of us, but he must understand what this means. It is not just living among us. It is becoming Apache in spirit, in loyalty, in life, forever." Ayana rose next, and Thomas noticed her hands trembling slightly. "I wish to speak," she said, her voice soft but clear. "When my husband died, I thought my heart would never again know warmth. I moved through days like a ghost, empty and cold. Then this man came among us, and slowly, carefully, like the spring sun melting winter ice, something changed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Such personal admissions were unusual in council. "I have fought these feelings," Ayana continued, her eyes finding Thomas across the fire. "Told myself it was gratitude, or loneliness, or foolishness, but truth must be spoken in council. If Thomas McKenna becomes one of us, it will not just be the band gaining a member. It will be—" She struggled for words. "It will be my heart finding its home again." The silence that followed was profound. Thomas felt his own heart hammering against his ribs. Ayana had just declared her feelings before the entire band, making herself vulnerable in a way that took tremendous courage. Nietzsche waited for any other speakers, then stood again. "Thomas McKenna, you have heard the words of the council. Now you must speak. Do you wish to become Apache? Do you understand what you would leave behind and what you would accept?" Thomas stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He looked around the circle, at faces that had gone from hostile to accepting, at children who now smiled when they saw him, at elders who nodded greeting each morning. Then his gaze settled on Ayanna, who watched him with eyes full of hope and fear. "When I came here," he began, his Apache words careful and deliberate, "I was a dead man walking. My body moved, but my spirit was buried with my wife. I thought I saved Kosheda and Ayanna that day at the creek. But the truth is, they saved me." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "You've shown me that family isn't just blood. It's choice. It's standing together against the storm. You've taught me that honor isn't about what others think, but about what you do when everything is against you." Thomas looked at Nietzsche. "I understand what I would give up. A world that no longer wants me. A life that had become empty ritual. And I understand what I would gain. A people who judge me by my actions, not my skin. A purpose beyond mere survival. And," he looked at Ayanna, "the chance for my heart to live again." "Then say the words," Nietzsche instructed. "Say them so all can hear." Thomas spoke the formal phrase Kosheda had taught him, his pronunciation careful. "I choose the Apache way. My life is your life. Your enemies are my enemies. Your path is my path. This I swear before the fire and the people." The old chief nodded solemnly. "And do any speak against this choosing?" Silence greeted the question. Even Bidzel, who had been most opposed, remained quiet. "Then let it be known," Nietzsche declared, his voice rising. "Two Apache sisters took a rancher to council, but their choice made him one of them. From this day, Thomas McKenna walks as Apache. He is our brother, our protector, part of our circle. What the fire has witnessed. Let no one divide." A sound rose from the gathered people. Not quite a cheer, but a collective exhalation of acceptance. Drums began to beat, starting slow and building in rhythm. Warriors stood and began the acceptance dance, their movements telling the story of a stranger becoming family. Thomas found himself pulled into the dance, stumbling at first but gradually finding the rhythm. When he passed Ayanna in the circle, she caught his hand briefly, her touch electric with possibility. As the ceremony continued deep into the night, Thomas was given new clothes, buckskin leggings and a shirt decorated with beadwork that Ayanna had secretly prepared. His hair was washed with yucca root and tied back in the Apache style. Each change was symbolic, representing his transformation from white rancher to Apache warrior. When the formal ceremony ended, smaller groups gathered to continue celebrating. Thomas found himself sitting with Ayanna by a quieter fire, finally able to speak privately. "Your words in council," he said softly. "Did you mean them?" She looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Every word, but I need to know, was it just gratitude that moved you to choose us? Or is there something more?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, then reached out to take her hand. "When Margaret died, I thought I'd never feel anything again. I went through the motions of living but felt nothing. Then I met you and slowly, like you said, the ice began to melt. What I feel, it's not gratitude, it's not replacement for what I lost. It's something new, something I didn't think I could feel again." "Love?" she whispered. "Love," he confirmed. "Different from before, shaped by loss and loneliness and finding hope where I least expected it, but love nonetheless." Ayanna squeezed his hand. "The path ahead is not easy. There will be those among both our peoples who will hate us for this choice. I know, but I'd rather face that hatred beside you than live safely alone." Kosheda approached them, her stern face softer than usual. "Sister," she said to Ayanna, "I am happy for you, and you." She turned to Thomas. "You are truly my brother now, but remember, if you hurt her, Apache or not, I will make you regret it." Thomas smiled. "I would expect nothing less." As the night wore on, the celebration gradually wound down. Families returned to their wickiups. Children carried sleeping in their parents' arms. The fires burned low, and the stars wheeled overhead in the clear mountain sky. Thomas stood with Ayanna, looking out over the camp that was now his home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The soldiers were still searching. Winter was coming. The pressures on the Apache to surrender to reservation life grew stronger each day. But tonight, he had found something he'd thought lost forever, a place to belong, people to protect, and a heart brave enough to love again. No regrets? Ayanna asked, leaning against him. None, Thomas replied, putting his arm around her. For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. In the distance, a wolf howled, and its pack answered, a family calling to each other across the darkness. The sound seemed fitting, a wild benediction for a choice that defied convention but honored the deepest truths of the heart. Thomas McKenna, once a solitary rancher, was solitary no more. He had been chosen, and had chosen in return. Whatever came next, he would face it not alone, but as part of something larger, a man transformed by the courage of two Apache sisters and his own willingness to see beyond the boundaries that divided their worlds. The morning sun painted the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, a masterpiece that no artist could capture. Thomas stood at the edge of camp, watching the light creep down the rocks. When he heard the cry of an eagle overhead, he looked up to see the bird circling high, its wings catching the early light, and felt a strange sense of completion. It had been 3 months since the council had accepted him, 3 months of learning, adapting, and finding his place in this new life. His hands were calloused in different places now, from working with bow drills and scraping hides instead of mending fences. His skin had darkened from the sun, and his hair, grown long, was tied back with a leather cord that Ayanna had braided for him. The camp was already stirring. Women tended the morning fires while children ran between the wickiups, their laughter echoing off the canyon walls. Thomas made his way to where Naichi sat with several elders, planning the autumn hunt that would see them through the coming winter. "Ah, Thomas," the old chief greeted him. "Good. We need your knowledge of the eastern valleys. Where did the elk gather when you ranched there?" Thomas squatted beside them, drawing in the dirt with a stick. "There's a meadow near Willow Springs, protected from the wind. The elk come down from the high country when the first snows fall. But," he paused, "that's close to the mining road. There will be more traffic there now." "Everything is close to white settlement now," one of the elders said bitterly. "They spread like floodwater, filling every valley." It was true. Even in their remote canyon, they could sometimes hear the echo of dynamite from mining operations. The world was shrinking around them, and everyone knew that someday, perhaps soon, they would have to make impossible choices. But not today. Today, there was work to be done. Thomas joined a group preparing for the hunt, checking weapons, preparing pack frames for the meat they hoped to bring back. Tarek worked beside him, and their easy companionship would have seemed impossible months ago. "You shoot well with Apache bow now," Tarek observed, watching Thomas test the draw on his weapon. "Better than with rifle sometimes. The bow is quieter," Thomas replied, "and it doesn't run out of bullets." "Practical. You think like Apache more each day." As they worked, Ayanna approached with water gourds for the hunters. When she handed Thomas his, their fingers touched, and the simple contact still sent warmth through him. They had been formally joined in an Apache ceremony a month ago, a simple but profound ritual that bound them together before the band and the spirits. "Be careful," she said softly. "The dreams have been uneasy lately." Thomas had learned to respect Apache beliefs about dreams and visions. Too often, they proved prophetic. "What did you see?" "Blue coats, many of them, and fire. But also," she smiled slightly, "I saw our children playing by a stream. So perhaps the dark visions show only what might be, not what must be." Our children. The words made his heart skip. They had not spoken of it directly, but the possibility of a future, of new life born from their unlikely love, gave him hope even in uncertain times. The hunting party left at midday, moving silently through the forest trails. Thomas had learned to read the land with new eyes, not just as territory to be owned or used, but as a living thing with its own stories and secrets. Every bent twig, every track in the dust, every change in the wind carried meaning. They found the elk herd where Thomas had predicted, grazing peacefully in the hidden meadow. The hunt was successful, bringing down 3 animals with minimal waste. As they worked to process the meat, Thomas felt the satisfaction of providing for his people. How naturally that thought came now. It was on the return journey that everything changed. Kiva, scouting ahead, came racing back with urgent news. Soldiers, not just a patrol, but what looked like a full regiment, were moving up the main valley. They had Apache scouts with them, reservation Apache who had agreed to help track their wild cousins. "How far?" Tarek demanded. "Half day, maybe less. They move with purpose. I think they know where we are." The hunting party pushed hard to reach camp, arriving as the sun touched the western peaks. The news spread quickly, and Thomas could see fear in faces that had shown only strength before. This was not a small force they could evade or ambush. This was the crushing weight of the American military brought to bear. Naichi called an immediate council. The options were few and bitter: fight and die, flee and be hunted, surrender and face the reservation, a slower death for a people who lived by freedom. "There is another way," Thomas said quietly. All eyes turned to him. "I could go to them, negotiate. I'm still a white man in their eyes. Despite everything, maybe I can buy time, or convince them you've already moved on." "They will hang you as a traitor," Kosheda said flatly. "You are known now. There is paper on you. How much gold for your capture? Maybe, but if there's a chance—" "No." Ayana's voice was firm. "We stay together, all of us." As the arguments continued, a commotion arose from the camp entrance. A lone Apache approached, but not one of their band. He wore the blue coat of an army scout, though his face showed the internal war such service caused. "I am Natan," he announced. "I come with message from Soldier Chief. He says surrender now. No one dies. Fight. Everyone dies. Women, children, all. He gives you until sunrise to decide." The council erupted in angry voices, but Natan held up his hand. "There is more. The Soldier Chief says he knows the white man McKenna is with you. He offers trade. Give up McKenna, and he will let you go to reservation in peace. Not chains." Silence fell like a stone. Thomas felt the world narrow to this moment, this choice that was no choice at all. He stood slowly. "Then that's—" "No!" Ayana was on her feet, tears streaming down her face. "I will not lose another husband to white men's bullets. If it saves the band, nothing saves us." Kosheda's voice cracked like a whip. "Reservation is death, just slower. We run, we hide, we fight, but we do not trade family for false promises." Old Sela, the medicine woman, spoke into the charged atmosphere. "The spirits told me this day would come. The white man who became Apache would face the test of tests. Not his courage, but ours. Do we stand as one, or do we break like a stick alone?" Naichi stood, his presence filling the space. "We have heard the soldiers' terms. Now hear mine. We are Apache. We do not sell our people. Thomas McKenna is one of us. His fate is our fate. We stand together." He turned to the army scout. "Tell your soldier chief this. The Apache will be gone by sunrise. If he follows, he will find only death in these mountains. We keep our brother. That is final." After Natan left, the camp exploded into action. Everything that could be carried was packed. The very old and very young were placed on the strongest horses. Weapons were distributed, including the rifles they had carefully hoarded. Thomas worked alongside everyone else, but his mind churned. He couldn't let these people, his people, die for him. As the moon rose, he made his decision. He would slip away in the night, give himself up to save them. It was the only way. But when he tried to leave his wiki up, he found Ayana waiting. "I know your heart, husband," she said simply. "You think to save us with your sacrifice, but you are wrong. Without you, I am dead inside again. Without you, the band breaks its word and loses its soul. Stay, fight with us, live with us, or die with us, but do not leave us. Looking into her eyes, Thomas saw the truth. His sacrifice would save no one and break everything. These people had chosen him, fought for him, made him family. To betray that bond, even with good intentions, would be the real treachery. "All right," he whispered, pulling her close. Together. Dawn came too soon, painting the sky the color of blood. The camp was empty, the band having melted into the mountains in the night. But they hadn't run far. Hidden among the rocks and trees, warriors waited. If the soldiers came, they would pay for every foot of ground. Thomas crouched beside Tarek and Kosheta, his rifle ready. Below, they could see the dust of the approaching column. So many soldiers, rank upon rank, their blue uniforms dark against the desert floor. "Whatever happens," Kosheta said quietly, "you brought honor to our family. Ayanna smiles again because of you. That is worth any price." The column reached the abandoned camp and stopped. Thomas could see the officers conferring, the Apache scouts examining the ground. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring, then, impossibly, the column turned, slowly, reluctantly, but definitely turning away, moving back down the valley. Thomas couldn't believe it. Why would they? Ayanna appeared beside him, breathing hard from running. "Sela," she gasped. "She went down in the night, spoke to their Apache scouts, told them about the vision, the white man who chose the Apache way, the test of brotherhood. She said the spirits would curse any who broke such a bond." And they believed her. Their scouts did. Said they would not be part of hunting a man who chose honor over safety, or a band that stood by him. Without scouts, the soldier chief is blind in these mountains. The band watched until the dust of the column disappeared entirely. Then, carefully, they began to emerge from hiding. There would be other days, other threats. The world was still closing in, and their way of life hung by a thread. But today, they had won something precious. They had proven that loyalty mattered more than blood, that family was chosen as much as born, that sometimes, against all odds, brotherhood could triumph over hate. As the sun climbed higher, Thomas stood with his arm around Ayanna, watching their people, their family, slowly return to the camp. The eagle from the morning circled overhead again, calling out across the vast sky. It was a good sign. Ayanna said, a blessing on their choice. "No regrets?" she asked, as she had that night by the fire. "None," Thomas replied. "How could I regret finding home?" In the distance, thunder rumbled, promising rain for the thirsty earth. The band would move again soon, find another hidden valley, continue their dance of survival. But Thomas McKenna, once a solitary rancher, now ran with the Apache, bound by choice and love and the courage of two sisters who had seen his heart when he couldn't see it himself. The circle was complete. The white man who had saved two Apache women had been saved by them in return. In a world torn by division, they had found unity. In a time of hatred, they had chosen love. And in the Red Rock Canyons of Arizona, their story would be whispered around campfires for generations, a reminder that sometimes, just sometimes, humanity could rise above the barriers that seemed insurmountable. Two Apache sisters took a rancher to counsel, but their choice made him one of them. And in choosing each other, they had all found something worth any sacrifice, a place to belong. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts on Thomas and Ayanna's journey. What did you think of their story? Your comments and experiences mean everything to us.